discussing graphical user interfaces with Java for the day. And to begin with, we'll again revisit our design pattern, model, view, controller. So, model is that pattern which will hold the data, right? So, it holds the data. So, typically in our programs, we say that model is Java object, and we write class. So, we write class to define structure of an object. So that's how we deal with the model. And view is the user interface with which user is supposed to interact. Let us assume that we need to register a user in our application, which is the very simple use case for any application. We need to register a user, log in a user. So in order to have a user to my application, I need this module. So it means I need to define the model first of all. So the model will go like user. It will have few attributes. I'll consider the first attribute as user ID. Then I can consider the name of the user. I can consider an email for the user. We can also consider a password for the user. And there can be even more details associated with the user. Now, when we have to collect the data for the user, so we actually do a hard code in our program. So as of now, we have seen that we have been hard coding. So let me begin here. So in order to construct the model in our Java project, let's see the steps here. So I'm going to write a new Java project. So this goes like session of 15. So I'm going to say a new class, and this class is user under the package com.oribisses.model. So we got a package called model in which we'll be writing all our models. So model, they don't have a main method, so you just say finish. Now in this user.java, I will be declaring a public integer UID, a string. So I'm going to take my attributes public so that I can access them outside the package, right? So I'm not declaring them private and creating getters and setters here. So string, we have name, then we can have an email, and lastly I can have a password. So if you want to write a constructor as a default constructor, so you can write that. If you want a parameterized constructor, you can say right click, come to source, generate the constructor using all the fields, say OK. And lastly, I am going to come and say generate a toString method. Right, so I got this much detail in my model here. So this guy is referred to as model or bean or Pojo. So Pojo is the term as in plain old Java object, right? Now in order to create an object, what I'm gonna do is in my src, I'm gonna do a right click again, create a new class, and I'm going to name this class as app, and the package goes like main with the main method. So in my application class here, app.java, I'm gonna say CISO app started, and thereafter app finished. So if you will create a user object, you will come up say, and here I'll say user uref is a new of user. Then I can say uref dot name is John, uref dot let's say email john@example.com, and lastly we got uref dot password, let's say pass123. Now this is the hard coded data, right? You see the data which I am writing over here as in the value for John, it's hard coded, and whenever you print out the data, so it's gonna give you the same output what you have punched in, but everything comes in the console. I want a graphical user interface, I want a screen, I want a window, I want a UI which will give me some fields where the user can punch in these hard-coded details. User should be able to write his name. User should be able to type in the email and the password. Right? So the very first step which we are able to see is to come up with the model which will hold the data. Now once you are aware of the model, only then you can move and design your user interface. Now can you take a moment and try to design a UI which will take these details? So if you come here and try to design some UI, some screen, so just try to design it in your notebooks if you can. Take a moment to design a UI. I'll try to design mine, you try to design yours. So here I am designing one of the UI screens. Now this rectangular section we have been seeing in our operating systems, right? In various applications. Now Java over here currently we are talking about desktop application development. We are not talking about a web application or a mobile application. So desktop app means it's gonna have minimize, maximize, close. Three major buttons, right? And this window which you can see over here is referred to as frame. So we call this guy as frame. Frame is an empty container which can contain some components. Now what kind of components we can actually put in? We can say please enter details to register. So this goes like one of the label which I am going to put up and display to my user. Thereafter I can say enter your name, enter your email, then we'll have enter your password. So this goes like three more labels which I am putting in. Along with these labels I'll have some text fields where the user can enter the details, right? So I think this is the most basic visual which we have been seeing in various standard applications to register ourselves. And lastly we'll have one more guy called button, clicking on which you can say register, right? So this is how a basic user interface looks like. Now this UI has been designed keeping in mind the model which we created. I haven't taken UID into account. I am considering that UID will be granted by us. It's a kind of a roll number which user should not be giving as an input that what should be my roll number, that we should be allocating to the user. So what this UI is containing, so we got this frame here. Other than this frame you got these guys over here as labels, the plain texts, the data in which user is, the fields in which data would be entered is referred to as text field, and this guy is button. So the blue color, it highlights some APIs with the help of which I would be able to design my GUI. So coming back now, let's understand view or the user interface in Java. So the very basic packages which we can use is java.awt, which stands for Abstract Window Toolkit. So it's a package which will have libraries, APIs, which we'll be using to create a UI. Then we got a bit advanced package called javax.swing. So I do have many more packages with which we can develop user interfaces nowadays, but to begin with you got AWT and swing. Now in the packages there is something known as container and there is something known as component. Container would be a window which will have minimize, maximize and close buttons, and we precisely say this window as frame. So in Java's GUI, if you want to create any graphical user interface, you need a frame. Just like a photo frame, this is an empty window which contains nothing. So in order to put something in it, we need some components which includes labels, text fields, then you got button, radio button, checkboxes, then you got combo box, we got a list, we got menus and many more. So we can design the UI the way we want, and we need to pick the components which are required. For example, you need to put up a gender as a field in your user model. So you need to pick up two radio buttons, one for the male and one for the female. You want to ask the user where you actually live in, which city you live in. So you need to put up a combo box which would be a drop down list. It will say select city. Right? So these are various components available. Now in the container we got one more container called panel. So panel is also one of the container. It's a lightweight container. Now how we are able to see our designed UI is that we understood what's a frame. We understood that these are a few of the components which are placed within the frame. But what we are going to do, we are actually going to make these various components not to flow in the frame but in this yellow color box called panel. So I will be putting up various different components in the panels. So this becomes one of the standard design patterns how we can create a UI. And you see there are now 5 panels, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can consider that they are the 5 rows in my UI. And all these 5 rows, I will be packing them in one more panel. So this is the final panel, panel 6. And this final panel, I will be adding in the frame. So if you look into this structure now, so this is a standard design which we'll be using. So we got frame, frame contains a panel, panel contains so many panels, and further panel contains components. Is this hierarchy clear to all of you? So now if you can count how many panels are required, total number of panels which we need to create a UI, 6. How many frames? 1 frame. How many text fields? 3 text fields. How many buttons? 1. And how many labels? So 1, 2, 3 and 4. So this label belongs to the frame and this label belongs to the button. So they are not additional labels. So it means in order to have the data available in my model, so if anyone wants to put the data in the model, I actually need to design such a UI. So UI designing will totally depend upon my model, the structure of my model. Now let us design this UI. So I'm going to come in my src directory and let's say a new class, and I'm going to name this class as register user UI. And I'm going to make this package as com.oribisis.view. So let the package name is view. So now we are able to understand that we got model and view, but we don't have controller as of now, right? So we don't have controller and we haven't discussed the controller as of now. So just to introduce controller, so controller will have business logic. Now what is meant by business logic? It means your algorithm or your logical part. So let's say you want to find a plus b whole square. So the basic business logic is a square plus b square plus 2ab. So that's like the business logic. So majorly the term business logic means that you are going to solve a problem with respect to some business, right? So it will have business logic, it will have your algos and some rules. There can be some rules which you can define. So rules come up by if and else. So there can be a basic rule that if age greater than 18, only then you can go. So that becomes a part of your controller, the business logic. So I am going to now work on my view. That's like my UI part. So I created a class registration UI. Now I am going to list the components which are required or the APIs which we need to design the UI. So the very first API is frame. Do a control space bar. You see frame is automatically coming from java.awt. Hit enter and you see import happening. So many times we will do a shortcut and we'll do a star, which is a wrong practice because it's gonna include a lot of bytecode in our program. It will actually enlarge the size. So always include only those APIs which are required. Don't say import star. It's not recommended. So I'll just say frame fr. Now what is this fr? Fr is a reference variable which will point to the object of frame. Makes a sense to everyone? So frame is a built-in class and fr it says is its reference variable. Now the next is labels. So we need to define the labels and we counted the labels here. So we counted 4 of them. Now a typical approach would have been that I will say LBL1, LBL2, LBL3, LBL4, but there can be one more professional way of dealing with it. So you can say label title, you can say label name, label email, label password. Now when you write meaningful code, it is nearly English and you actually understand the code well. So always ensure whatever you are writing, you give meaningful names to the classes as well as to the variables which you are going to declare. Don't declare them like L1, L2, L3, L4, L5. Now next is your text fields. So control space bar, it's imported. So you say txt name, txt email and txt password. So we do have more of the structures here. So we got a button now. btn register. Then we got finally the panels. So I have panel title, then panel name, panel email, panel password, and one more panel, panel button, and one more panel, guys, it's like panel all. Right, so we got these 6 panels declared. Now what is the first step over here to create a UI? The first step is to declare the components required to design UI. Components and containers. Now frame and panel, they are containers, whereas label, text field, button, they are the components with which the user will interact. What I will do next is I will create a constructor, a public constructor, right? So you do a control space bar, it will ask you to create a constructor. So I'll create a public constructor. Now why public? Because I want to create the object of register user UI outside the package. You see now, so we are now developing our app in the packages. So register user UI, I will create the objects in app.java. So I need to have the constructor over here as public. Now let us initialize one by one all of these reference variables. So this is how you create a frame. That's it. You create an object of frame. Now if you see in our existing window with close, minimize and maximize, you see a title coming in here. Java session 15. We call it the title of a frame. So I can give a title to a frame, let's say welcome. So if you want to set the title sometime later, you can even call the function fr.setTitle. So choice is yours. Even you can leave the constructor blank and thereafter you can call the method, or you can right away give it in the constructor. In order to initialize the labels, so same way you say label title is a new label. So in the label title, you see we have given please enter details to register, right? So I will say please enter details to register. So I can even come up and say that LBL name is a new label, and thereafter you say LBL name dot set the text, enter your name. So choice is yours again. So whether you wanna make a function call a later, so you can even do so. So LBL email is a new label, enter your email, and thereafter we got this LBL password. So for this password, rather than taking up an open text field in which everything will be visible, we can actually come up and say let's have a, so that actually will take up in swing package. So I'll take up in a swing package that what is exactly the password, how we deal with the password. So AWT is a very old way of coming up with a UI. So label password, and now I'll decide these text fields. So you say a new text field. So I'm gonna decide that it's gonna be 14 characters wide. So the width of this guy, right? So how many characters we can bring in? So it's gonna be taken care here. Not the width, I mean length. So similar to the txt name, we'll have email and the password. And lastly, we got this button register is a new button, and I will say register. So rather with the register button, I will take one more button. So I will name this button as cancel. So cancel means if you wanna just close the UI, cancel. Lastly, let's initialize the panels. So I got 6 of them. So panels, they don't have anything specified as in their labels here and there. So they are just, you can say a visionless, so they are just transparent containers, right? So they will just contain data. So for panels, let us copy some more instructions here. So we got panel name, email, we got password. Now if you do not initialize any of your declared reference variable here, so you can end up in getting null pointer exceptions. Because if a reference variable is null and you're trying to use it, it's gonna throw a null pointer exception. So make sure every field, every component declared here is initialized. Now once I am done with the initialization part, I am going to create one more public method, which is show UI. So calling this method, the UI will be displayed. Now in order to show the UI here, we will come up in panel title and we'll just add label title. Now you see it's very much same what we discussed. Over here in the first panel we added the title. In the second panel I need to add the label and the text field. So let us see in the next panel, which is panel name, we'll add label name as well. I am going to say txt name. So similar to the name, I got email and password. So I got panel email, label email, and the text field email. Then I got panel password. We got label password and the text field password. Then I got panel button where I'm going to add 2 of them, btn register and btn cancel. So button cancel was not the plan in the UI, but we are executing it over here somewhere. Now, since we got all the panels containing all of the components, we need to put all the panels in one single panel. So I'll say, let's add from the beginning panel title. Then I got the name panel, email, password, and lastly we got button. I hope we didn't skip anything. And lastly, in my frame, I will just say add the panel all. So the way we designed this UI, right? So panel title, panel name, panel email, panel password, and then the panel button, and all the 5 panels in one single panel all, and the panel all within one single frame. So you see, everything is added in the frame. And now I will set a size to my frame. So I'm going to choose it like 400 by 400. So it's pixels more or less. So I'm creating a square design. So you can have it in a way that you can have it an increased length versus the width. If you want to design a precise rectangular UI for your desktop, for mobile phones it's different, right? So there you need to increase the height and decrease the width. Lastly, you say effort.set visible to true. You want to make your frame visible to the user. Now this is what you got the code structure for your graphical user interface. Come back to app.java. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say register user UI. User UI is a new of register user UI. So the moment we created an object, so constructor will initialize all of the references to the UI, and thereafter what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say user UI dot show the UI. So show UI will execute over here addition of data in the panels, then frame will add the panel and will set the size. Let's run the code here for the app.java. So we get to see a UI. So this UI looks very much satisfactory, but it's a bit like more on sizes, so this looks better now. But the moment you maximize this UI, it's gone. Now why so? Because when we are adding the components in some container, there is something known as layout. Alright, so next part is to understand what's a layout. But before that, if I close, it won't work. If I click on buttons, it won't work, right? So it's a UI but actionless UI. You cannot perform any action on this UI. So I have to just exit from here and now come back and understand, while designing the visuals, the UI, we got something known as layout. Now layout is an arrangement how components shall be placed. Just for an example, as of now you guys are sitting in a layout of grid arrangement, rows and columns. So same way we can have a flow layout where the way you have added the components in a similar way they will be visible. As of now, the default layout in the panels is flow layout. So the way you have added, in a similar way you were able to see them. So one after the other they are being added linearly. Then we can have a grid layout. So it's like rows and columns. We can even have a border layout. So it can add the views or the components in north, south, east, west, center, 5 of the directions. So we have many more layouts to use in, right? So I'll be exploring this layout called grid layout now. Let's see that. So in this register user UI, before I add panel all to the frame, I will create a grid layout. I'll say a grid layout. Layout is a new of grid layout with rows as 5 and columns as 1. Makes a sense? Why? So if you see this user interface, we got row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5, but there is only one column. So coming back, I will say panel all dot set the layout to be this layout. So I have settled the layout of panel all to be a grid layout. Now if I run my code again, so you see the UI is looking much better now. So even if you maximize, it's not a problem. So we got the correct structure. So layouts are important. But having such a UI is like wasting space. I cannot predict. Again, the UI is again actionless, right? So again actionless. I cannot close it. So coming back here, instead of saying some set size, I can come and say fr.pack. So take the size whichever is required. I mean to say it's basically best fit. So the concept is best fit here. Now let's read on the app here. So by default the UI will come up in the best size. That's it. You need not to decide 400 by 400, 300 by 300. We are done with it. Now something should happen when we click on these buttons. Some action should be given. Now what happens in Java, when you click on these buttons here, register or cancel, right? Whenever you're gonna click on these buttons, so there will be an object of a class called action event. There will be an object of a class called action event. It will be created by the runtime environment and it will be thrown. The way we had seen exception handling, in a similar way the fundamental here is known as event handling. If we click on the buttons, so an object of action event class will be created and it will be thrown. So who will catch it? So in order to define the graphical user interfaces with some actions, what we are going to do is we'll come here in our class and say implements action listener. So action listener comes from the event package. If you see over here, it's from the event package, and when you implement an interface, it becomes mandatory that whatever the rules they are defined or declared within an interface, you need to define them. But I don't know what are the rules. I am studying action listener for the first time. So that is where we recommend to use IDE and not Notepad. So you click on this arrow. So this arrow will say that you need to add unimplemented methods, and there is only one method called action perform. So that is how IDE is teaching us. So just click on this add unimplemented methods and you see that there is a method called action perform which is catching the reference of action event object here. The way the catch block was catching the reference of some exception object. So here action performed is catching the reference of the action event object. Now in this action performed we can code, but before we code we need to come and say btn register dot add the action listener. Similarly btn cancel dot add the action listener. Now why I have added this? Because my current object implements action listener. So you see our class itself is implementing action listener. Now if someone will click on the btn register, so I'll say if e dot get the source is btn register, we'll come to know someone has clicked on btn register, and the else part obviously means cancel. So in the cancel I am going to say fr.dispose, which means just finish off my frame. And I can even do a basic CISO which says cancel clicked, and we can write here as register clicked. Let's rerun the code and see if there are some actions in our UI or not. So when you click on the register, it says register click. So we'll click on it n number of times, it will work n number of times. When you say cancel, so it says cancel clicked and you see the UI is gone. So that's how the fr.dispose is working for us. Now in my app.java, I was creating this user object and I was doing a hard code here, right? So let us comment this part, and now I'll create a user object here. So when someone clicks on the register, so I will say user uref is a new user. Instead of doing the hard code name as in John, I will say uref.name assign txt name dot get the text. So whatever user will write in the text field, you get that text and you assign it to the name. Now we are populating the data in an object by reading the data from the text field. So you got uref.name, similarly you got email and password. So txt email and txt password. So once we are done, so we'll say CISO the uref. So same thing we were doing the hard code part over here. Instead of doing the hard code structure, on click of the button, we will extract the data from the text fields and we are putting it into an object. And you see over here, we are printing the same reference variable. Let's see how it behaves. So app started, UI comes up, app finished, so main method is gone, main thread has finished its job, and rest the process is still in action. Let's write down the name as Sia at example.com and the password, let's say Sia123. So you see password is still visible. Now that is what I was talking about. Now when you click on register, you see the data coming in. So we captured the data from the UI and we have added the same data into the model, right? We added the data into this user object, into the model. So that's how the fundamental is model and view linked to each other. So from the view, you extract the data and you put it into the model. And you give this model to the controller so that controller can process the data. So cancel will finish off this UI. So as of now, everyone is good to go? Great. Considering that we are designing our user interface, so we can design the same UI. So I'm gonna take register user swing UI. So what I'll do is I'll just copy paste the entire code here in my register user swing UI. It will also do the same implements of action listener. So the only thing which will change is the constructor. Is it okay to have? Everything is same, it's just a replication of the same code. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just add J in front of them. So instead of the basic APIs, we got these J frame, J label, J text field, J button and J panel. Now these are the APIs from the Java X.Swing package. They are more optimized, they are less on weight, as in the memory consumption they are less, right? So in order to import them, so I'll just say Control Shift O together. So it's gonna import all these APIs automatically for me. JFrame, right? So okay, so it didn't do that. Yeah, so here we are. So it imported all of the APIs. Control Shift O means organize imports. Now instead of frame, we got JFrame, JLabel. So everything is with the J in uppercase as in the beginning. So everything is same. So there is no point of confusion here in the difference between Swing and AWT. So that is how we got this UI done, and here we are left with the J part. So now you can explore this API called J password field. So you can say password, right? Instead of having txt password, you can use this guy called J password field. So the only difference is that it will have stars coming in when you will type in something. So you can use this J password field. Now when I am supposed to use this API, so it will be the same way. So instead of saying register user UI, you can say register user swing UI is a new register user swing UI, and swing UI dot show the UI. So you run the code now. So we won't notice much difference here. So on the MacBook it's very much similar, and on Windows you might feel a very change. So AWT is very basic UI, swing is a better UI, right? So OS to OS it will vary. So rest everything works in the same way. So we just change the name of the APIs from frame to JFrame, label to JLabel, so on and so forth. So I didn't implement the text, the password field. You need to implement that, guys. So click on register, you get to see the data. So cancellation over here can also be done by just closing this UI. So in swings, you can directly close the UI. That's it. Good to go, guys. How to write a UI. So we got to see how we can extract the data from the UI and put it into the model. So we will do some more of the things similar here.